Word 4, live up to your name. What's your name? St. Andrews. Now, for some, that brings an image of a golf course in Scotland and a delightful medieval town. For others, it simply is this church, and few understand where it got its name. But I pull out an old sermon. It was one that I preached on, what was the date of that? It was December 16, I believe, 1984. And some of you were here when, with bagpipers, we carried the Bible. The clerk of session, Les Miller, carried the Bible from the old A-frame sanctuary into this room. The pews hadn't even been put in yet. They were put in between that Sunday and the next Sunday. But my message was titled, Meet St. Andrews. St. Andrews was what? A fisherman. And he met Jesus. He was a common sort of guy without a whole lot of natural talents. But he didn't just luxuriate in the fact that he met Jesus. What do? You can read about in the first chapter of John. He told his brother about Jesus. And who was his brother? Peter. Now, Andrew, a man of simple gifts, shared his faith. Few of us will have the eloquence and organizational skills and leadership abilities of Peter, but every one of us can be an Andrew. And after the crucifixion and resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ, he went on and he pastored and preached in Turkey and in Greece. He was buried in Constantinople according to church tradition, and his body was then transferred to Amalfi in the Italy coast. He's the patron saint of Scotland. But I hope when you hear the name St. Andrews, you'll not just think of this church or a golf course in town in Scotland, but that you'll think of one person sharing their faith with someone else. Last night, a lawyer who sits in the balcony of this church was at the contemporary service. And I said, "Why did you come tonight? You don't like this kind of music." He said, "Because I know a woman who lives a block and a half from here. She's a single mother raising kids, and I invited her to come, and I want you to meet her." She's thrilled. That's the future of St. Andrews, friends. This church will be dead within 10 years unless we reach out and share Christ and share this wonderful community. No ads in newspapers can do it. It's word of mouth. As D.T. Niles, a great missionary statesman, said, evangelism is one beggar telling another where they got bread. Let's never forget that. Remember your name. Live up to it. And finally, the fifth word is an invitation in an individual way, not just a corporate way, to dedicate and rededicate your life, to celebrate the Lord's Supper and all God has done for you in the person and work of Jesus Christ. But also, as you come to the table, to consecrate or reconsecrate your life to Jesus Christ. These are serious times. There's not a person in this room that does not have some apprehension of the future. Some of you that have prospered have seen your equity go way down. Some of you may have some cash reserves and you do not know whether to get into the market heavy tomorrow morning or to sell, do you? We don't know where this thing's going. And some of us of more modest circumstances are not certain about the future and our children's future. And there are those here that have physical problems. Some of you are concerned about your health and emotional stability and members of your family. And God only knows the myriad of challenges that are in front of us. And it's a moment of crisis. And sometimes a moment of crisis is a good time to reevaluate who you are and where you stand with the Lord. I remember my mother was with her a few nights ago in Wheaton, Illinois, and she was telling about how she lived on the farm in northern Michigan when the Depression hit. And there were a few members of that community, that farming community, that had moved to New York and made fortunes, and they were well known in the community for their success. When those that stayed there were very modest means, eking out an existence on the farm, but during the Depression, at least they could put food on the table and they had shelter over their heads. When stories came back of some of their fellow citizens who jumped from high-story buildings, having been wiped out, sad stories. I hope that will not happen, but in the papers this week we heard a story of that, of someone up in the valley. Did we not? But the reality is, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and he walks with us as we're willing to walk with him. I conclude with this. Dick Halverson, who many of you knew when he was associate Hollywood Church, knew when he was at the Fourth Presbyterian Church in Washington and then the Senate chaplain, loved to tell a story about a pastor who had come to complete failure. The church asked him to leave. He was fortunate to get a call finally somewhere in the Midwest. He was living on the East Coast. As I remember the story, his family stayed to finish up, and they were going to drive the family car along with a moving van. But he had to go by train to begin the new job, and he went through Chicago, where in those days, when you traveled by train, that was a major transfer point. Depressed, walking around that great train station, didn't know anybody, wondered, will he be a failure again, when he looked up and saw a man, a former professor of his from Moody Bible Institute, who recognized him, called him by name and said, how are things going? And you know, it's easy to say great, but they weren't. And he opened up, he had the courage to open his center to that man, and the man said, well, I've got to go catch my plane, but this is a train, this is serious business. Let me just share a word with you. And he quoted from the King James, Romans 12, 1 through 2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good, acceptable, and the perfect will of God. And then he prayed for him and left. And that pastor found that a transformational moment. He said, all right, I don't know whether I'm going to be a success or failure where I'm going, but Lord, I give myself to you. And I give the challenge of life to you. I give my failures to you. I give the misunderstandings and how I've not been treated well to you, and my part in it to you. And he made the sign of the cross with his toe. And he stood there as people rushed this way and that, went, boarded his train, and went on to what was one of the finer eras of his ministry, with the new beginning that came through reconsecration of life. I don't know where you are today. I know those moments in my life, receiving Jesus Christ as a 5-year-old, wrestling with who is going to be Lord of my life in my mid-teens, 14 years old, the challenge to what to be and who to marry in the early 20s, and then the bereftness of a 51-year-old pastor whose daughter had died. In each of these stages of life, I had to get down on my knees, make the sign of the cross, open my heart to the Lord, reconsecrate myself to him. And this weekend is a celebrative great weekend, but it takes on all the more significance as individually we do business with God. For someone, it may be the first time you've come to faith in Jesus Christ, and you're giving your life to him. For others of us, our reconsecration, coming back to him. For others of us, just bringing the challenge of life and the uncertainties of the future and saying, Lord, I'm not going to be knocked down by this stuff. You went to the cross for me. That's the worst thing that could happen. And that isn't going to happen probably. And I just trust you as we move into the future, as we now sing a hymn of preparation for the Lord's Supper. This is open communion. It's closed to anyone who has not repented of sin and put your trust in Jesus Christ. But it's open to all of us who admit our need and have trusted him alone. And I urge you, as we sing this hymn of preparation, that you do business with God. Concentrate on the words, but let those words alert you to some area in your life. And as we sing, or following it as we take the sacrament, I urge you at some point to make the sign of the cross with your toe, in a gesture that you've done business with God. So this weekend of dedication, celebration, and consecration is not just institutional about buildings and a 60-year history, but it's highly personal for you and then we move forward together into the future.